Um, Good afternoon. My name is Maria Helena Carey, and I am here with Phil Mendelson, who is the incumbent. He's our chairman of the the Council of the District of Columbia. Thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
All righty. Well, so I will ask you a few questions, and these questions will be available on our Instagram and Twitter, and they will be a video on YouTube so that people can listen to your answers and go on to make their decision as they cast the ballot for the Democratic primary. So without further ado, let me start by asking you, as someone who's been in politics for a very long time, and specifically, you've been chairman of the District of Columbia for 10 years. How does your tenure prepare you for re-election? Do you feel that it could be good to have somebody's new perspective, fresh perspective, or do you feel you're still ideally qualified for holding on to the job? And what do you think about term limits?
Well, there were a few things in that question.
Yes, sorry.
There's never been a person elected as chair of the council who had not previously served as a member of the council. That's true with, my predecessors and everyone going back to Sterling Tucker. And that's important because the role of being chair of the council is not just being a council member and where I am on issues and whether I can deliver for the community, but as chair, I also am responsible for representing the institution, the legislative branch, whether it's representing the Congress or standing up to the mayor or working with the mayor to get legislation through. More than that, I view a responsibility of a legislature to get things done. And I often make a comparison with Congress, which doesn't get a whole lot done. As chair of the council, I look to find solutions, not impasse, but solutions, compromises to get bills through. And I have to do it over and over again. I set the agenda, I have to work with colleagues, I strive toward getting unanimity or consensus. And that comes with experience. It is more than what one needs just being an ANC commissioner. You know, I was an ANC commissioner for 20 years before I was elected to the council. And I can tell you, remembering back when I was first elected, that what I had to do as a member of the council was far different than what I have to do as chair of the council. So experience is important. I constantly talk about my record because it shows what I'm able to do, but it also shows where I am in terms of values. I've been able to deliver on progressive issues over and over, and that's important. But as I said, that's important as a member of the council, and as a chairman of the council, more is required.
Okay, thank you. And what about term limits? Do you feel that I mean, it's been brought up, it was brought up in 1994, and then it was brought up again, I believe, in 2019. Do you think that is there a time for it, or not necessarily realize that, it's not necessarily something you would want?
Well, I've never supported term limits. I didn't support the initiative when it was on the ballot in 1994. Democrats generally do not support term limits. I've looked at the history of the council, and it's been a few years since I did this, but the average tenure of a council member is 8 years, which is 2 terms, equal to 2 terms. Some have served less, some have served more, but on average, it's been 8 years. And if I remember correctly, that was looking at mean, median, and mode, all different ways of measuring average. So we have a fair amount of turnover. I look at my colleagues in Prince George's County where they have term limits, a disadvantage because it takes time to build relationships. It takes time to know the breadth of issues that we deal with as a council. And it takes time to learn the details of specific issues and the history of them. And in Prince George's County, members just begin to get all that figured out, and then they have to leave because of term limits. So I don't support them. I think there's a value to experience, and I recognize that some members get stale on the job, and the voters can throw them out. You look at my record, I don't think I've gotten stale on the job. This year, I did some really innovative stuff with the budget on funding schools and at-risk populations. I did some innovative stuff in terms of getting more vouchers for affordable housing. Look over the years, go to my website, mendelsonforchairman.com, and you'll see a lot of really, what do I want to say, landmark issues that I've put through, whether it's marriage equality in 2010 or tax revision, income tax revisions in 2014, minimum wage in 2016, universal paid leave in 2018. So I don't think I've gotten stale on the job.
Okay, well, wonderful. Thank you for your thorough answer. I just heard you mention schools, so I'm gonna go ahead and ask my question about schools. Well, as you know, schools are under mayoral control. Do you think this has worked positively for District of Columbia Public Schools? And has this mayoral control of schools been hard for the council to work with?
Well, it's interesting the way you phrased the question. First of all, I do not support efforts to change the governing structure for our schools. When you ask whether it's worked hard for the council, I would say just the opposite. Because there's not an independent board of elections that has, board of education that has jurisdiction over our schools, falls to the council. So if anything, it's made it easier for the council to be involved with public education. Interestingly, I did not support mayoral takeover in 2007. And the reason I didn't is because the research indicates that the organizational chart for governing schools is not better one way or the other. In other words, there's not evidence that an independent board of education, I don't know why I keep saying that.
That's okay. They both start with you.
The research or experience is clear that an independent board of education does not necessarily mean a better school system, which also shows that mayoral control does not necessarily mean a better school system or better public education. But our experience is quite clear that changing the organizational structure loses accountability for at least half a decade. And that's what happened back when we changed the organizational structure. I've long said that the organizational chart isn't what makes a difference. It's what's going on in the classroom. So there's better accountability now that we have mayoral control, and there are folks who want to get rid of mayoral control because they hold her accountable. It's pretty clear. In the old days, the folks could blame the mayor, who would blame the Board of Education, who would blame the mayor, who would blame the council, and it wasn't clear. The economy wasn't as clear.
It's a round robin of blame, so to speak.
Correct. But for me, I'm focused on what's going on in the schools themselves, getting more resources to the schools directly, particularly schools that have high populations of at-risk, ending the budget instability that DCPS schools go through every spring when they're given their budget for the next year. I want to end that. And I want to focus on issues that make a difference in the classroom, like teacher turnover and literacy. What are we doing to improve literacy? Focus on those issues rather than the organizational chart.
Is it frustrating, though, that whatever you may want to do, the mayor may still override it and have the last say?
Well, she can only override it to a point. If it wasn't the mayor, it could be the Board of Education. And there we would arguably have less ability. The council would have less ability. So I've had more oversight hearings in the last month, a year and a half than the previous education committee, and been far more involved with regard to trying to change how we are educating. Maybe I shouldn't say change, but improve. And I don't feel like the mayor's overriding. I feel like exactly what should be happening is happening, which is the push-pull of the legislative and executive branches.
Okay, thank you. My next question is about redistricting. Redistricting left Ward 6 residents, largely one of the most affected wards, if not the most affected ward. They were left reeling from the redrawing of boundaries and the feeling that not all council members are as open to constituents' input as others. Is there more than the council could have done or could do in future redistricting so constituents feel more included and have more agency and are listened to more in their concerns of where they want to live and who can listen to them and their concerns in general?
Well, the challenge with redistricting was that Ward 6 is so popular that its population had grown phenomenally. In fact, when we redistrict, we were supposed to have the population size of each ward roughly equal. And there were 3 wards that were way off the average. Ward 7 and 8 were way below, and Ward 6 was way above. And very simply, changing the boundaries between 6, 7, and 8 would have solved the problem. There were some other adjustments that were made. I worked closely with the Ward 6 Councilmember, Charles Allen. There was no question, because Ward 6 had to shrink in size, that there were folks who were going to be unhappy, whether we're talking about the southern border of Ward 6, roughly around Navy Yard, or on the eastern border of Ward 6, more, like Kingman Park and Dale. And my experience with redistricting is that folks really don't like to see their ward change, but it was going to have to happen somewhere. I worked closely with the Ward 6 council member to find a solution that made the most sense and was the least disruptive. Some will remember that the subcommittee made some proposals that were very unpopular, very, very unpopular. And I worked with the community to come up with some compromises. I don't want to say that folks who went from being in Ward 6 to being in Ward 7 were celebrating, but there was much more comfort with the final boundaries, which I put together.
Okay. Thank you. Let us move on. And
I might, if I could add.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're now going through the ANC redistricting, and we're actually seeing some of the same upset that we saw with the ward redistricting. What the subcommittee proposed was dividing the Hill East neighborhoods between 2 different Ward 7 ANCs. Correct. Which I think would be a mistake. So I put forward a proposal that, again, was not wildly celebrated, but seemed to be a compromise that was accepted by folks on both sides of the Anacostia River. That went through on a unanimous vote. Well, actually not unanimous. Alyssa Silverman, who chaired the subcommittee, voted present. Other members voted in yes. And we're still making some adjustments to the single member districts, but I think we've got the the ANC boundaries pretty close to final. And that has all of the single member districts that are west of 19th Street. I think it's seven single member districts would all be in one ANC. So an ANC that crosses the river, but it still they would be united instead of split. And I think that makes the most sense. Advisory neighborhood commissions are supposed to represent neighborhoods, not be split.
Sure. I mean, and neighbors on a geographical area that is not separated by a river feel more connection than those on the other side of the river. I am wondering what could be done, because part of the reason why people are a little feeling disenfranchised moving to another ward is that you've repeated that you work very closely with Charles Allen, but I have not heard as much from working with the council members from Ward 7 and 8, who have not necessarily been as vocal about perhaps even welcoming people into their new communities. How can you help that?
Well, I'm even though I'm the chair of the council at large, I'm elected by the entire city, and we're talking about my constituents. There were on east side of the river, west side of the river, and I will, of course, work with them. As I said, you know, on the redistricting, I've met with folks from both sides of the river, and I make myself available, and I'm there to resolve problems. So if folks feel that the ward member is not welcoming, although that kind of surprises me, I'm certainly willing to step in.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see. Speaking about boards 6, 7, and 8, we're all interconnected, but there is a dearth of transportation options on the eastern side of our ward, and 7 and 8 definitely have a dearth of transportation. Some residents would like to see a streetcar fully developed, while others feel that the streetcar is a waste of money. There's bus and circulator lines that only seem to cater to points west. How can we expand transportation to the places that need it and prioritize it, or keep doing so, while also keeping communities safe from speeding and all sorts of problems that come with that?
Sure. Well, you know, let me begin with this. For those who think that automobiles are a problem, in my view, the answer is to make alternatives more attractive. And I say that because there's some folks who believe that we should make driving an automobile more unpleasant. No, make the alternatives more attractive. And you make the alternatives more attractive and they become more useful to the community. I do think that bus service needs to be expanded. And I'm the one who makes the nominations to the Metro Board for the council to approve. That used to be split as a matter of custom between the mayor and the council, but by law it rests with the council, and I've taken that. And I have been more attentive to folks who use Metro bus as well as Metro rail, but I'm going to say Metro bus on a frequent basis. The last 2 appointments that I've put forward, Tracy Haddon Lowe, frequent bus rider, and before her, Stephanie Giddaby, frequent bus rider. And what this does is in turn not only represent the district well at the WMATA board, but also better understands the needs of bus. We want to increase bus service. Now you mentioned streetcar. I think that the streetcar on H Street should be extended east to be completed. It's never made sense that it ended in Oklahoma Avenue. I think that
kind of in the middle of nowhere in a way.
Correct. The way that previous mayors rolled out the streetcar was shameful and actually hurt the project. You know, the streetcars themselves were bought going around the council back in the early years of the Fenty administration, and were storage in Europe until the rails were laid, and the rails were not laid until finally, the mayor was unable to figure out how to get around the council and submitted a contract to the council. That was the first, I think that was in 2010. I mean, it was, I said shameful, it was just crappy the way it was rolled out, and really hurt the idea of a streetcar. So,
well, and it hurt trust between the council and the mayor.
And between the public. And,
right.
And so where there was a lot of support for streetcar initially, it became almost a pariah. I think at this point, people are accepting of the H Street line, which they should be, and that I'm comfortable with saying that it should be completed. Years ago, I'm not sure that would have been accepted.
Great. I have a question for you. What would make you ride public transportation more often? I know that there was a debate where you said that you have a valid fare card, but you don't ride public transportation very often. What would make you ride public transportation to work on a regular basis?
The challenge for me is that I have a lot of meetings I have to go to.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's during the day or in the evening, and so that doesn't lend itself to the time it takes to take the bus or metro rail and then transfer.
Mm-hmm.
It's unfortunate. If all I had to do was commute to work, I would walk 1 block to Pennsylvania Avenue and I would take the 30 bus. It takes 10 minutes to get to the Wilson building. And I've done that sometimes when I didn't have any meetings to go to.
Mm-hmm.
For what it's worth, I drive an electric vehicle, so I'm not feeling guilty these days about polluting the atmosphere. And it also is making me more aware of the challenges for people who want to drive an electric vehicle, which namely is we need more public charging stations.
Absolutely.
But public, open to the public.
Yeah. I love the jerry-rigged, cables that you see sometimes walking around the hills, somebody kind of dragging their own extension cord to plug the car in.
Yes. I've been to other cities where there are charging stations that are in public parking lots and anybody can pull up and charge. They may have to pay, it may be free, depends upon the jurisdiction. But the point is that it's accessible. Here, most of the charging stations are in private garages, like office buildings. And, but in any event, that was a digression from your question about public transportation. I find it very convenient to take the 30 bus into town, more convenient to take than taking metro rail.
Yeah, well, I can see that especially. Yeah. Thank you. I am also wondering, what could you have done as chairman, or what are some things that you feel as chairman you could have done differently so that Vision Zero were more successful and less of a kind of a little bit of a punchline?
Yeah, well, this kind of gets into understanding the role of chair, and it's easy to, well, the chairman of the council can do everything and is responsible for everything. In fact, we have a very strong committee structure. So Vision Zero is a proposal from the mayor that went to our transportation committee. It was supported unanimously by the council. I think that there should be more oversight by the transportation committee, more oversight than there has been.
Mm-hmm.
But my real criticism of Vision Zero is that DDOT, it seems to be more of a talking point, and DDOT has never done the assessments that are necessary and that, as I recall, are called for in the legislation. So there are a lot of, been a lot of activity, for instance, bumping out intersections intersections to protect pedestrians and good stuff like that, but not the kind of assessment that's necessary of looking at the accidents that have occurred, whether we're talking about fatalities or just serious pedestrian injuries. I don't know why I'm struggling there. And based on that, refine the strategies to reduce the number of traffic fatalities in our city. So, if I'm just hypothetically, if the accidents that are occurring, I want to pick an intersection, DuPont Circle, the accidents that are occurring at DuPont Circle are analyzed and we see that they all correlate to geometry, then we change the geometry of DuPont Circle. Mm-hmm. If the accidents, a lot of them seem to be related to drunk driving and partying late at night, well, instead of focusing on geometry, let's develop strategies to deal with the late night partying in that area and the accidents that occur. Mm-hmm. That's what is not happening. And that's why I think Vision Zero has missed the mark. It's not that a lot of the geometric changes, I mentioned the bump outs earlier, it's not that that's a bad thing. It's that it may be missing what's really going on.
Okay, thank you. One final question for you. It is interesting that you bring up the fact that individual agencies seem to let down people at different turns. Like you mentioned, DDOT doesn't seem to be doing what they're supposed to. My final question is actually about the Office of United Communications that has made several life-threatening errors, but Mayor Bowser went ahead and appointed Karima Holmes as acting director of the agency, despite many of the more grievous errors having happened during her initial tenure, from which she quit about 2 years ago. Can and should the council be more vocally opposed to situations like this when the mayor decides to appoint someone who probably shouldn't be reappointed?
Well, I'm going to look to Charles Allen, who chairs our Judiciary Committee, who has oversight over that agency and what his recommendation is. I will say it's difficult to reject a mayoral nomination.
Mm-hmm. And why is that?
I'm not sure it's clear why. For one thing, it's a kind of a clumsy strategy is not a clumsy role for the council. Mm-hmm. We don't select, we don't direct. We have a yes or no, and
so you don't get like an asterisk kind of thing.
Correct. That's a piece of it. I think a piece of it as well is that it's so rare that a cabinet level appointee is rejected that members are unwilling to do it. Mm-hmm. I can assure you that if Councilmember Allen recommends a no vote, I will vote no. Mm-hmm. I do have a concern that there were problems at the agency. I had oversight over the agency before I became chair of the council, so I'm thinking at least 10 years ago, and there were some challenges then, but the agency was doing far better than it is now. We used to constantly analyze how long it took to answer calls, mm-hmm. how well trained the 911 call takers were, also looking at what was being done to deal with the stress on the job. You know, when I chaired Judiciary, there was a call taker who committed suicide in the bathroom at the call center. And there's just a lot of stress on the job. And so I'm concerned that the agency is not running as well as it used to. But as I said, there should be a public hearing, mm-hmm. for folks to come forward, and airing of the criticisms of the agency when Ms. Holmes was there before, and then see what the recommendation is of the Judiciary Committee.
Okay, well, thank you. Before we wrap it up, would you like to say anything? The floor is yours, whatever you'd like to say.
Sure. I hope I don't go on too long. A couple of things. You know, when we talk about agencies, so it becomes a bit more difficult for me, even though I'm chairman, when we're talking about an agency that's under a different committee, because I have to defer to the committee chair. Mm-hmm. Under my committee is UDC, which over the last 10 years, since I've become chair, I think UDC has gotten stronger, more stable. It's improving. It still has a ways to go in terms of picking up enrollment, but we don't hear the kind of criticisms of UDC we used to hear. That's great. Also under my committee is DCRA, Department of Consumer Regulatory Affairs, which has generally been, I want to say, harmful to everybody, homeowners, developers, people, vacant properties. I've gone after DCRA on its lax enforcement of vacant property, which reminds me, since we're talking about the Hill, you know, mm-hmm. the infamous vacant house at
1000 C Street Northeast.
Yep. And due to the spotlight I put on it in the last year, and I have to say, I mean, I'm not the only one who's put a spotlight on it. There's a Twitter account for.
Absolutely. It's a very funny Twitter account.
But I added to that spotlight, and there's been some news stories, and I wrote to the Attorney General, and Carl mm-hmm. Filed a court action, a fraud case against a property owner a couple of weeks ago. It's in tax sale now. There's a fraud case pending against a property owner. I think we're going to see that the days of its being vacant are limited.
Wonderful.
DCRA has not done a good job, and there's only so much the council can do. We can have mm-hmm. hearings, which I've had. I welcome testimony from folks, and A couple of the Capitol Hill agencies have been very vocal and active with regard and helpful with regard to DCRA. So what we finally have done is we've broken up the agency. And this coming October, we will have 2 new departments, one of which will be the Department of Buildings, which will be responsible for construction permits. And that includes enforcement against illegal construction. And it will also be responsible for the housing code, which means enforcement against housing code violations and slumlords. And this is the council's effort at trying to change how the mayor has been operating an agency, because the operation of agencies is an executive function. The other thing I want to say is that I hope that out of this conversation has come a better understanding that the chair of the council is required to have broad knowledge of city issues, which comes from experience, and the skill to get things through. I mentioned the new Department of Buildings. The mayor actually vetoed that legislation, and I got the council to override the veto. When we adopted universal paid leave a few years ago, counting votes, I knew how to get that through and to make some compromises so that I had the majority votes. And when the mayor threatened to veto, I knew how to make sure that we could have the votes necessary, the 2/3 vote to block a veto, which never materialized because I did get the 9 votes. This just requires experience and skill and a knowledge of the breadth of issues and challenges that face the government. And I hope some of that's come across in this conversation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for talking to me. And if people want to find you, where can they find you?
Well, if they live in the neighborhood, I'm over by Watkins. So,
but I mean on the web.
The campaign website is mendelsonforchairman.com.
Okay.
mendelsonforchairman.com. And we have issue papers there for public safety and affordable housing and education, as well as my record on delivering on progressive issues. So there's a lot there, as well as if folks want to help with the campaign.
Okay, well, thank you so much again, and I appreciate you.
Thank you for this opportunity. I really appreciate it.